Well, if you want to sign up for any of the contests that are going on in Las Vegas, Westgate Super Contest, Circa Million, Golden Nugget Ultimate Football Challenge, William Hill Pick'em, I think Stations has a contest as well. Vegas, Maddie, and Tony over at footballcontest.com. They've done a phenomenal job for us over the last several years. I anticipate they'll do a phenomenal job for us again this year with our entries in the Super Contest, the Circa, and the Golden Nugget. Head on over there to footballcontest.com because if you live outside of the state of Nevada, you need a proxy to put in your picks for you. You can enter the contests, but you have to have somebody put in your picks for you on a weekly basis. So let Maddie and Tony over at footballcontest.com do that for you. Let them know you heard about them on the Bang the Book Radio podcast here. They'll take great care of you the same way they've taken great care of us. We got one more guest, one more segment here for this Thursday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is with Thor Nystrom of Rotoworld joining us here today. Thor, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going really well. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Great to have you on the program here. And I'm going to make a really bad joke at the start, but I guess we're going to have to start calling this Thursday, right?
Oh, let's do it. Absolutely.
Oh, man. Thirsty Thorsday. I guess we'll call it here for the show. And now that awful joke is out of the way, I got to ask, man, I've been kind of checking in with everybody. I know we had you on the show once late last year. As far as your summer, I mean, do you even get one, or are you just nose to the grindstone with college football all day, all the time?
Yeah, college football, and did a lot of NFL draft stuff this summer too. We ran through every position on offense, through the summer. So I was diving into the quarterbacks for the 2020 class, the receivers, the offensive guards, the centers and everything like that. And then, of course, doing my research for the season. So I'll tell you what, Adam, my first love is college football above the NFL draft, and my sort of side love is betting on college football. So I am very excited that the games are about to start again. We could stop talking about theoretical, prospects or whatever, or, just sort of thinking about these in hypothetical terms. I can't wait for Saturday. We have two very, very fun games on tap.
Yeah, we really do. A lot of fun games on tap for week 0. And then, of course, week 1, has its fair share of intrigue as well. Maybe not as many national games as people would want, but a lot of interesting games from a betting standpoint, to be sure. And Thor, I do want to start with this because you've got a different background relative to a lot of the other guests that we have on the show, the professional handicappers that do a lot with power ratings, and they're working on this stuff throughout the summer months. You know a lot about the personnel. So what I'm really curious to find out is, how do you adapt your knowledge of the personnel to the betting side of the spectrum and, be able to organize your thoughts that way?
Yeah, so, as Adam knows, I listen to Bang the Book all the time. I am looking for information all the time. I'm looking to accrue, all of that from a handicapping aspect, as much data as I can. So in my process, it sort of begins with the sort of analytical side of it, where I set an adjusted line of my own to begin the week. And I have adjusters for that line during the week based on certain market indicators, such as theme moves or, discrepancies in tickets bought against money wagered, which is another indicator of the sharp side, or potential indicator of that. So I have these 5, 6, 7 little indicators that I will allow to modify the lines for me as the week goes, depending on the way that the market stands on that. So I start with that sort of baseline. And then, Adam, what you're referring to is, yeah, I watch as much college football as anyone I know, because for work, I cover college football. And so I watch all the games. I cover all the teams year round. And so that part of it, I have to bake in. I can't just be an analytical handicapper. It's not me, first of all, to go all the way with that. But second of all, I do bring that other thing to the table. And so my approach, it sort of tries to blend those two things together, where there's sort of half analytical side and then sort of a half old school, grinding the tape, I suppose you could say, kind of a style. And when those two sides of my brain sort of are both seeing the game or a specific game, a specific matchup in the same way, that's when I'm going to sort of load up on that game. So that's how we do the process.
Well, so with the personnel, I mean, are you constructing power ratings the same way in which most of us do by kind of breaking down the position groups? Or are you just looking at it on a game-by-game basis and saying, I know there are matchup advantages here at positions X, Y, and Z because the personnel? Or is it, do you put that into, you maybe quantify the value of that personnel?
Yeah, I do. But yeah, for me, the way that my process goes, that's more of the art to it. I know some people, they try to quantify that more scientifically by doing the power ratings, where that's how they do it. For me, even, as closely as I follow the sport, the way that I see it is, even though I'm watching a ton of, I have like 6 screens going in every time slot. So I sort of have like a mini Phil Steele kind of a setup. But I'm still not able to watch every game, right? And so I don't feel comfortable sort of adjusting Ball State's offensive line power rating or, Army's linebackers or like, whatever. And so for me, it's more about when I have that background on the team, when I have seen them, when I do have that kind of information. Obviously, I have, returning starters, and I have data like that. But as far as really feeling like I can add something to that conversation, I need to have seen it and have a feeling about that, and then that's when I'll bake that in on the latter half of my process. I already have the numbers, the data, with these adjusted lines and stuff that are already, these other, systems and stuff like that are already baking stuff like that in. And so when I can bring something else in extra to try to find an edge, separate from that, looking at that from the outside or whatever, that's where I'll come in with that. But yeah, I mean, it's so important. I feel like, to bake in those matchups, because you can find a lot of edges in that, and sometimes they're edges that other people aren't seeing. Even if you're, you have a premium subscription or you listen to a lot of different podcasts, there's certain things that people can miss just because in college football you don't have to disclose injury information. A lot of that stuff isn't out there, and there's not as much media coverage as the NFL. So it's really a sport where you can win by the more homework that you do. So I try to do as much as I can.
Well, and something else I want to touch on here, and this is something that, I think a lot of us kind of have our arbitrary values for coaches and coordinators and things like that. We know who's a pretty good coach. Maybe some people attempt to quantify it based on record against the spread or, how they do as a favorite, how they do as a dog, something like that. But with studying of that personnel, I think almost by proxy, it fills you in more on the coaches and the schemes and how the personnel fits with what the coach wants to do. I think that can be really advantageous as well.
I agree. Yeah, you both, that it gives an indicator both of the direction of the program and also the skills of the coaches. For instance, like last year, FSU, Willie Taggart's first year was an abject disaster, right? FSU was kind of a joke. But the reason was because they're terrible offensive line. And that goes back to the last coach. Mr. Jimbo Fisher took a bunch of high-risk flyers on high 4-star offensive linemen that were complete projects. They didn't develop any of them, whether that was because of apathy, as far as the coaching staff, or whether they just misfired in the recruiting process, where these were guys that were never going to pan out, but they happened to be big and move pretty fluidly, but they just weren't football players. They take chances on those guys, and it caused the program to really regress, and Jimbo got out of there, and Willie Taggart's going to have to kind of clean up the mess. But, yeah, different stuff with Miami and their quarterbacks. We're going to be talking about Miami here in a little bit, but the way that Miami has recruited quarterbacks, the type of quarterback that they have gone after, and then the lack of development of those kind of quarterbacks, obviously that's what ended Mark Richt's time there. We're going to see if Mr. Diaz can come in from the defensive side and fix that with Jaron Williams. That's going to be a fascinating thing to see on Saturday, because, man, is Miami out on a limb for making that decision for reasons that we'll get into, I'm sure, in a little bit here. But, yeah, those things are super important, Adam, and they're things that I think about sort of endlessly. They're things that just sort of fascinate me: program direction, who coaches target, how they develop those guys, the systems that they use them in, why does it work, why does it not work, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and it should make for a lot of interesting discussion here over the course of the season. And I guess we'll go ahead and apply some of this to these games that are coming up here this weekend and give people more of a tangible idea of, what it is that you're using all of your information and research for. Game 291, 292, Florida, Miami. Again, Miami going with Jaron Williams. And on one hand, you look at this and say, well, shit, the bar is so low at Miami for quarterback play right now anyway. It's hard to see this guy being any worse than they had last year or any worse than what they would have had with Tate Martell. On the other side, You can look at it and say, well, maybe this guy fits Dan Enos, who is a very respected offensive mind out there. Maybe this is the right type of guy to go up against that Florida defense. We don't have a lot of tape on Jaron Williams. Neither do the Gators. So what's your thought process for this game?
Yeah, I agree with that. The Gators don't. And also, something that I would tell people is, I've seen Miami get a lot of heat for their decision to go with Williams, specifically over Tate Martell. Tate Martell is just the guy that people know, right? He had a very high recruiting rating. He was on that television show. I don't know if it was on Amazon or Hulu or one of them or whatever. I caught a couple episodes, but didn't get all the way to the end. But he was on that. He's been at Ohio State. He's been in the public consciousness. He's got a big personality. And so when Miami, went out and signed him, and it was a buy low signing. It's nothing. It's like in baseball. You have like a reliever who before was a closer, and he's sort of struggled or whatever, but he has a name behind him. Just sort of buying low, like at the trade deadline on a guy like that or whatever. Ohio State didn't want him. It was go. They could not have been more aggressive going after Justin Fields, and I don't think they could have been more aggressive in telling Tate Martell, you can hit the road, Jack. And so Miami comes in and they sign him. Again, for me, it was a low risk signing. I know that he has the big recruiting hype and it got the fans excited and everything like that. But for me, it was more of a depth thing. It was getting another cook in the kitchen. But I'll tell you this, I trusted, as far as like an indicator of the future, something that has predictive value, I trusted Ohio State's apathy, as far as when Martell was leaving, just, okay, you can go over Tate Martell's recruiting clips. Whereas I think the Miami fan base was sort of focusing on his recruiting hype over, Ohio State, just sort of telling him to go, even though he'd been in the building for a while there. So, as far as that, I didn't get super duper hyped about that. And frankly, to me, the fact that Miami staff, not only admitted that N'Kosi, with his decision, not only sort of admitted that N'Kosi Perry is a developmental failure, it sort of seems like they're pulling the plug on that, but also that they admitted to the mistake of signing Tate Martell. Not that it was a mistake, but just that, as far as anyone that thought that he was going to be a starter, just sort of coming out and that's not what he's going to be, and going with Jaron Williams. Going with Jaron Williams, to me, that was the hardest of the three decisions. I think the easiest thing for Miami to have done would have been just to roll out Tate Martell, regardless of how well he did, because the fans would have loved it heading into the week. Now, obviously, if he got eaten alive by Florida's defense, their perception would have changed or whatever. But, in these last couple weeks leading up to the opener, I think that was the one thing that, Miami fans maybe were not rooting for, was Jaron Williams winning the job. But to me, that is a good sign. It shows me that Manny Diaz is doing things the right way. He's not like focused on short-term things or perception of the fan base, et cetera. He's focused on trying to win games. And in his opinion, Jaron Williams is going to give them the best chance of winning. Now, like you said, we haven't seen a lot of Jaron Williams, so who knows? Jaron Williams could be Malik Rozier 2.0, or he could be, N'Kosi Perry 2.0. It's possible. But the fact that the coaching staff chose him over two options that would have been easier to present to the fan base heading into the opener, to me, again, it's one of those things that's just a little bit telling and a little bit indicative. And in this, I think it's a positive sign. The kid's got tools. He was a 4-star recruit. I think he was the 106th player in the ESPN 300 in his class. The reason we haven't heard about him is, again, Malik Rozier, and then N'Kosi Perry was the guy, that was seen as the heir apparent. And then after that, they went out and got Tate Martell. So the reason, Williams hasn't been in the public consciousness is just because of that. There's always been other guys to talk about. That doesn't mean that the kid can't play. I mean, he was a ballyhoo top 150 consensus recruit. I'm very curious to see the way that he plays. But again, I'm more optimistic on this news heading into the opener than I am pessimistic.
Well, and I think what's intriguing about this game in particular is that, Felipe Franks did improve last year. And one of the reasons why I lean Florida, I'm not going to take Florida in this game. It's right on the power ratings number that I have. But one of the reasons I lean Florida is because I anticipate a guy like Dan Mullen to continue that development path for Felipe Franks. I have no idea what Jaron Williams looks like in this game. I have no idea what Jaron Williams looks like for 2019. But I'm still not going to go out there and bet it, because Jaron Williams won the job, as you mentioned. I mean, this is the guy that they went with. Maybe he won the job by default because Martell didn't look very good, but he still won the job in a spot where the optics of the decision were a little bit challenging, as you just mentioned. So maybe Jaron Williams does go out there and have a day. And if he does against the Florida defense, as I talked about previously with Brad Powers, I'm wondering what happens to the perception of Miami at that point, who does play a pretty weak schedule, is pretty good at the skill positions, is always good on defense. This was Diaz's defense last year. If Jaron Williams plays well, all of a sudden the ceiling for Miami is dramatically different. I'm kind of rooting for that chaos, to be totally honest with you.
100%. Yeah. And you said it. Miami's schedule stinks. You know, there's so many of these like title contenders that are playing like these really hard schedules, and those are the teams that a lot of people are betting on to win the title. You know, these teams are just brutal schedules. You know, if you're looking at some of those futures, for me, I'm not betting on I'm not betting Alabama to win the title or, you know, stuff like that. I'm just looking to make a couple long shot flyers, and yeah, Miami's in that discussion because what if Jaron Williams is good? What people aren't talking about this. What if he's good? You know, we haven't seen Miami have a good quarterback for a little while, so I know, you know, your brain just sort of wants to say it's going to be Rozier and it's going to be Perry all over again. But what if he is good? And like you said, if he is, that ceiling goes from like, you know, they're probably going to, you know, have an 8-4 season that's going to be super duper boring to could this team make the playoff, right? Because like if they beat Florida here in the opener, then you're talking about this gauntlet: UNC, Bethune-Cookman, Central Michigan. You know, they do have to play Virginia Tech, but then they host Virginia Tech, then Virginia, Georgia Tech, Pitt, FSU, Florida International, and then Duke. Folks, that is Miami's schedule this year. If they can come out and upset Florida in the opener, they are a legitimate playoff contender, and because of the schedule. You know, that's just what it is. So if you want to get a future bet in on Miami, you know, to make the playoff or to win the title, you want to go really, really long shot. I think it's going to happen? No, not necessarily. But if they win this game, they are in a very, very good position where they're going to be favored in pretty near every game down the stretch.
Well, and this is one of those things, too. I mean, right now I have Miami power rated at 78. They're the number 26 team in my power ratings, although effectively tied for 24th with Washington State and Florida State. If Jaron Williams is that dude and they're just running through the ACC, that number against Clemson's maybe 10 or 11-ish in the ACC championship game for me. Mm-hmm. So it's not a ridiculous to hedge against a playoff future or a national championship future, because they're probably not going to beat Clemson, but at least you're set up to make some profit, which is ultimately the goal of every futures bet that you make. Thor, let's transition over here. 2-game 293, 294, Arizona and Hawaii. Arizona double-digit favorite, 11 the consensus market number out there. A lot of interesting cats to keep an eye on in this game, though.
Oh, yeah. This one, I know the other one's bigger. It's got more ramifications, but the nightcap here is the one that I'm truly looking forward to. I love Hawaii. You know, the Rainbow Warriors on the stadium app, you know, late Saturday night, you know, every Saturday. I love the whole thing. Cole McDonald, the return to the run and shoot and everything like that. And Arizona's another fascinating team. You know, and Adam, I'm curious to get your take on this. But for me, I'm seeing this game different than some people, and I think it's because I see the way these seasons played out last year a little bit different. You know, Hawaii finished 8-6, and everyone was thrilled with that. You know, because of the way that the offense had played and everything like that. It was very exciting. They were back in bowl season. They started out 6-1, everything like that. Whereas, you know, Arizona finishes 5-7. It was Sumlin coming in, you know, with his system, Khalil Tate's, you know, high-octane skill set and everything like that, and they were going to take the world over on offense. They had all this returning talent last year, and then, you know, they sort of limped to this 5-7 finish. They had some very embarrassing losses in there, you know, starting Houston, I think in either in the opener or week 2 last year, got blown out by Houston, then they got, you know, blown out by a couple Pac-12 teams later on in the year, just demoralizing stuff. But I see it a little bit differently. Hawaii, you know, they finished 8-6. They made the bowl and everything, but that was on the back of this 6-1 start. Well, they were just playing a bunch of cans at the beginning of the season, a bunch of cans who also, you know, you go back to the tape thing with Jaron Williams. These horrible teams that Hawaii started out with last year, they had no tape on the run and shoot offense. You know, I mean, and it seems by the way that they played it that their coaches weren't showing them the old Cole Brennan stuff or anything like that. Especially you go back to week 0 last year when they just ambushed Colorado State, and it was just like, oh my gosh, what are we seeing? We'd heard whispers that they were going to switch to that offense, but it was like, you know, it was like Cole. I mean, you saw, you know, Cole McDonald come out on the field. It was just like, oh my gosh, it's Cole Brennan all over again and stuff like that. You know, so they ambushed him, but it turned out Colorado State stunk. You know, whereas with, you know, some of those other teams that Hawaii beat. Whereas, you know, Arizona, they get blasted by Houston. They lost to BYU. Well, the BYU loss at the time looked just absolutely awful, but BYU ended up making a bowl game, you know, and then, you know, after a month, so Arizona starts 2-2, then Khalil Tate hurts his left ankle, you know, in game 5, and he played through it, you know, to his credit. You know, Khalil Tate is a very tough kid, but he plays, for the next month with this compromised ankle, and the offense went into the tank. Khalil Tate last year was really good in 6 games, which people don't talk about, and he was awful in 6 games, which is all that people talk about. The 6 games that Khalil Tate was awful in, it was the first 2 games against teams that had very good fronts, G5 teams, and independent with BYU, but they were bowl teams that had good defensive fronts. During this transition where you go from Rich Rod's offensive scheme to Kevin Sumlin's and Noel Mazzoni's, huge offensive shift. People didn't talk about that a lot. It was going to take a little bit of time. So we get through those 2 weeks. Tate played better the next couple of weeks. Well, then he gets hurt. And those next 4 games, he played awful again. But, down the stretch then, he played well, right? Like, they lost some games in there for sure. But, they blew out Oregon, should have beaten Arizona State in the finale. I mean, Arizona really should have made a bowl game last year. I forgot what the score was heading into the fourth quarter, but it was something like, 41-20 or 40-21 or something like that against Arizona State. And then, Arizona just coughed it up, in the fourth quarter, just procession of miscues. And Kevin Sumlin had a major clock boo-boo at the end of that game to lose it. But instead of going 6-6 and then having the opportunity to play some mediocre G5 team in the bowl season to win it and go 7-6, where the perception would have been different, they instead, their season ends at 5-7. Meanwhile, Hawaii beat just all these awful teams to finish 8-6. But I want people to keep something in mind. Last year, against top 100 S&P Plus teams, Hawaii was 2-6, and against teams that were in the bottom 30 of the FBS in S&P Plus, they were 5-0. So that's how Hawaii wins. Hawaii is a team that's like they're a bully against terrible teams because terrible teams do not have the secondaries to compete with all the different athletes that Hawaii has. In this system where the receivers sort of get to freelance their routes and everything like that, and they always have the defense on the heels if you can't get a pass rush on them and you don't have athletes to match with those receivers. But once they started to face defenses that could, and I'm not talking Alabama or LSU, for Hawaii, we're talking more like the BYUs and, teams like that, teams in the MWC that at least had some type of secondary play. They really started to struggle. Now, to be fair, Cole McDonald did struggle with an injury of his own, in the middle of the season or whatever, but their struggles, Hawaii, you can pretty clearly delineate them between the good opponents that they played and the bad opponents that they played. Whereas I feel that Arizona's struggles and the way that their 2018 season played out, the circumstances, it didn't have to do with opponent quality because we saw Arizona absolutely annihilate Oregon, right? And again, they should have beaten Arizona State, et cetera. It was more about these other things. It was a hard transition to begin with, and then Tate got hurt. You don't want to give excuses because I think, Sumlin and Mazzoni, they both hold culpability here. They did not do well, right? And if it repeats, they are going to be on the hot seat really quickly, and they may even accelerate right beyond that and go into sort of the Jim McElwain zone, where you can get fired before the end of your 3rd season. But I don't think that it's going to repeat. I'm a little bit more bullish on Arizona than I think some other people are, just because of these circumstances, and my anticipation that those aren't going to be there this year. And then with Hawaii, it's sort of the other way, just because I saw the way that their season played out, and they just don't put a scare into good teams.
There's a lot of phenomenal points and a lot of great thoughts in there, and that's something I think is important too. Is that a lot of times when we survey the previous season to put together power ratings or whatever else, we look at returning starters, returning production, all that type of stuff, but we probably don't do enough of what you just talked about with Hawaii, where they beat up on the teams that they were supposed to, the teams that were equal or below them, and struggle with teams that were above them. And there's no doubt about it that when you look at an Arizona team as a double-digit favorite going to the island in week 1, even with Hawaii not being as good at home as they have been in the past, it's still a sign that Arizona is at least a tier or two above Hawaii. I think it's an excellent point. Something that hasn't been brought up here yet so far this week on the show. So, thank you for bringing that to light. But it makes sense, exactly what you said there. And whether you want to play Arizona in this spot or not, you still have to consider the fact that Arizona is a better team. And when Hawaii played better teams, they had problems. Does that change for this year? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, you go back to Hawaii's win last year. you're talking Colorado State in the opener. We thought the Colorado State was going to be decent, but it turns out that they stunk. So that win means nothing. They beat Navy, similar thing. We thought that Navy was good last year. Turns out that they weren't. Beat Rice, one of the worst teams in the FBS. Then they beat Duquesne. Then the next week, they go to San Jose State. That was the game where they needed 5 overtimes to beat San Jose State. San Jose State's basically an FCS team, and they needed 5 overtimes to beat them. The next week they play Wyoming. Wyoming only scored 13 points. Hawaii is one of the worst defenses in the nation, and Wyoming couldn't crack it. So Hawaii beats them 17-13. Then Hawaii doesn't win again for, I don't know, a month or more. Then they beat UNLV by a touchdown, great. And then the last game they upset, quote unquote, San Diego State. That San Diego State team was in the tank, and it was a 1-point win in overtime. So this thing could have gone the other way, and you tell me what quality opponent they beat. Now they have a Pac-12 team coming in, a Pac-12 team that wasn't great on defense. Last year they weren't great on offense either, but they have athletes, right? And Arizona runs a 4-2-5. They, on defense, they always have 5 defensive backs out there. That's the way they play. They're designed to play against spread teams. Last year they had a really good cornerback named Jace Whitaker, who was injured on his first series of the season, knocked out for the season. He's going to be coming back this year. Arizona already has a really good linebacking core. In that 4-2-5, they got 3 guys. They one of the guys, is in a lot or whatever. Top 2 guys are great. The backup's really good too. And those guys are specifically awesome against the run. But the top 2 guys, reading around this summer, they talked all summer about how the thing that they did this offseason was try to lose as much bad weight as possible and work on their quickness, their fluidity, and stuff like that. The one kid I'm referring to is Colin Schooler, who's a all Pac-12 sort of star linebacker or whatever. And Colin Schooler's a kid who, as a true freshman, came in, played right away, and was great. But he's one of those guys who's awesome against the run, and the coverage and the pass rushing was lagging a little bit, behind or whatever. But this kid wants to be great, and I think he's talked to evaluators, he's talked to his coaches. What do I need to do to make it in the NFL? Along with everyone else in his position group, and it seems like that was the feedback they got. Him and this Fields kid. And so anyway, they spent this offseason trying to get better at that. You don't want to read too much into that stuff, of course, but just the fact that these linebackers, who we already know are awesome against the run, that they're thinking about that. Because, Arizona as a team was pretty good against the run last year. Their one big issue on defense was they weren't getting after the passer enough. And I think, one way that they can get more of a pass rush is to deploy those 2 linebackers more as blitzers, in selected situations or whatever. And so just the fact that those guys are already thinking about, this coming season, we want to stay awesome against the run, but we want to create a little bit more havoc in the backfield, and we also want to get better in coverage. Just the idea that they know that that's a weakness in their game, just, that's sort of implied by the fact that they're going about this work. I think that that's very positive. Arizona secondary, I expect Arizona to be better against the pass this year. They did lose, a very key player last year early on. That's tough, because it's not like Alabama, losing a corner in week 1 or whatever. They're going to be able to replace him, with another stud or whatever. Someone was working with, all Rich Rod's recruits. Rich Rod wasn't recruiting great at the end. So it's not like he could just shuttle in another guy who's, going to be an above average Pac-12 starter. So getting back to full strength there, I think that helps. I think it helps that Arizona has a lot of familiarity, maybe not with the run and shoot, but with, spread aggressive offenses. And the one thing Arizona's got going for them that Colorado State didn't last year is, again, Colorado State went into week 0. They had no idea what they were in for. Now, Colorado State had a terrible secondary too, but they also had no idea what they were getting in for. And Colorado State still, I think they got within single digits maybe at the end. They lost by 9 or 10. So it wasn't like, Hawaii really raced out, but it was a little bit closer at the end there. I just think that Arizona is going to have a much better idea of what Hawaii is going to want to do. Hawaii will not be able to run the ball in this game. So, I'll just tell you guys right now, they're not running the ball. And so they're going to have to throw. And Arizona knows that they're going to have to throw. And Arizona is going to have a minimum of five defensive backs on the field at all times, and go up from there. And then, they have these really active linebackers or whatever that I think are going to be able to focus more on blitzing in this game and also dropping back in coverage. So I like that matchup a little bit more just because we've seen last year when Hawaii was starting to play those better teams on the schedule, that's when the passing attack really devolved. And that was when they had John Ursua. NFL fans out there will remember that John Ursua was drafted in this past class. John Ursua was a stud at Hawaii last year. I mean, he absolutely ate. He was probably a more valuable player to that offense, if I may say, than Cole McDonald himself. And that's not their only loss. The other big thing going on here that doesn't get talked about a ton is Hawaii's defense is an absolute abomination. It was an abomination last year, and last year they had a guy named Jelani Tavai, that absolute stud linebacker, a guy who, a defender that a program like Hawaii maybe gets once every 10 years, and they happened to have him in his final season, and he didn't play the entire season. He got injured for a little bit, but he played in 8 games. And so they had this guy. He was a top 50 pick in the draft. I think he was, 10th or 11th pick in the second round by the Lions. Obviously, the NFL agreed that he was a tremendous player. And despite that, they finished, as a bottom 20 defensive unit, Hawaii did, and they got shredded by long plays on the reg, both in the running game, both in the passing game. In terms of giving up explosive plays, they were near the bottom. Their defense as a whole finished 118th in S&P Plus defense last year. And then they were 111th in allowing explosive plays to the opposing offense, number 111 against rushing explosion, number 102 against passing explosion. And then this is where I delve into Khalil Tate's now healthy. He's 100% healthy. Kevin Sumlin says his legs are back. It is a night and day difference between this season and what ended up happening last year with the ankle. So Khalil Tate should be back. When he can run, he's one of the most dangerous players in the NCAA. And when he can't run, well, he's just sort of mediocre, right? Because he's sort of planted in the pocket. Is he a great pocket passer? No. Is he ever going to be? No. Doesn't mean he's like a terrible player. He can hit his passes when he's running, because those lanes are going to be open, right? The year before he hit 60%, even though he was a bit rawer as a passer. That percentage dropped a little bit. But last year he was a sitting duck. He was confined to the pocket in those 10 games. The first 2 games, I honestly don't think that Sumlin and Mazzoni had completely gotten the team up to speed, because when they came out to play BYU and Houston, those teams out-physicaled them, and a part of it was because the Arizona players, even though, a lot of them were more talented than the opposition, you could tell that they were thinking, especially Tate, back there, because Mazzoni had clearly told him, you stay in the pocket, man. We're going to try to make you a better pocket pass. So he was trying the first couple games, and it wasn't working, and I think, we were going to delve into Sumlin and Mazzoni sort of came in with, this is our ideology. This is what we want to do. We're going to turn this, fabulous playmaker into more of a diverse playmaker, where he is also going to be able to shred, teams through the air. And we have multiple years with him, so we can sort of go through the growing pains. I think those first couple games were the growing pains. And I think as those guys sort of started to realize, like, well, we don't have to have it our way or the highway between our polarity and Rich Rodriguez's polarity, where Khalil Tate was running almost as many times as he was passing, whereas with Mazzoni and someone the first couple games, the discrepancy was more like 5 passes or 6 passes to every run or whatever. I think it was going to start to delve more the other way, where they were going to start to meet in the middle. And it was Khalil, we still want you throwing, we still want you, to stress defenses, vertically and everything like that. But we're going to allow you to run a little bit more. And I think that's what we're going to see this season. It's just the issue last year, I think, when Sumlin and Mazzoni were going to sort of get to that, realization or whatever, that's when Tate got hurt. And when Tate got hurt, it really defanged the offense. And it's not just and Adam, let me, I know I'm rambling a bit here, but let me give you some stats, because I know I'm sort of speaking in some, generalities here. Though, if you combine those first 2 games Arizona had with the month that Tate was injured, okay, Arizona went 1-5 in those games. Khalil Tate had a 4-4 TDI&T ratio, 52% completions, and he ran for less than 4 yards a carry. Okay, in the other 6 games, it's not a sample size like with Hawaii where you separate it out like this, and the strength of schedule and the opponent's strength is much different in both. It's not in this one, because in the other sample you have teams like Oregon in this latter sample. But in these other 6 games, Arizona went 4-2. Khalil Tate posted a 19-4 touchdown to interception ratio, 60% completions, and over 8 yards per carry if you take the sack yardage out. And there's one other thing here. Khalil Tate, it's not just – he doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like when Khalil Tate's great, it's not just that you lose Khalil Tate's great play if he's not great anymore. It's also that it has a deleterious effect on all of his teammates. And so just one example of this in action, you look at J.J. Taylor, who's Arizona's small jitterbug, waterbug type running back who can be very dangerous in specific circumstances. You look at him when Khalil Tate was struggling in that 6-game sample. I talked about the first 2, and then when he was injured, he ran for 479 yards in those 6 games. You look at the other 6 games, the other sample where Arizona went 4-2 and Khalil Tate was playing awesome. J.J. Taylor ran for 955 yards in those games. And it was merely because Khalil Tate's legs were back. When Khalil Tate's legs are back, defenses are terrified of getting shredded by Khalil Tate. So they have to do something to compensate. You can't just sit back and let Khalil Tate do what he did to Colorado the year before and break rushing records. You have to do something. And so that's when it opens up the passing game. And obviously it gives more space to J.J. Taylor as well. You know, everything bogs down when Khalil Tate is not Khalil Tate, and everything plays up when he isn't. If Khalil Tate is indeed healthy, they are going to be able to name the score on offense. Hawaii isn't going to be able to stop anyone this season unless magically a Jelani Tavai or two fall from the sky. I don't see that happening. Hawaii's defense was awful last year with a defensive talent that was almost generational at a program like that in Tavai. They're going to be worse this year. You know, and then is the offense going to be better? I don't know. I mean, it is year 2 of a system. You do have a starting quarterback returning. You do have the entire Hawaii offensive line returning. So I'll give them that. But they still aren't going to be able to run the ball. And they did lose Ursua. The guy they're going to replace him with is a guy named Melky Stovall, who flashed as a freshman for Cal. He was playing with Sonny Dykes in the air raid. And then when they switched to Justin Wilcox, Stovall was sort of, you know, he was showing up on milk cartons. Basically, he wasn't usable in that system. So he transferred out to Hawaii. I think he's going to be fine. You know, I do think the passing attack is going to be fine. But it's still sort of a one-trick pony. So you have this sort of one-trick pony offense, no defense. Is that good enough to stay within a couple touchdowns of Arizona if Khalil Tate is at least 90% of Khalil Tate? I don't know. I don't know about that.
Well, I don't think we're going to find a more comprehensive breakdown here of that Arizona versus Hawaii game. Lots of great stuff, schematics, personnel, you know, obviously the splits with Tate when he's healthy, and then, you know, Hawaii when they stepped up in class. So lots of very, very strong stuff there on today's show. From Thor Nystrom, you can follow him on Twitter at ThorKU. You can also find his work over at Rotoworld. Thor, what do you got going on over at Rotoworld right now?
I will be publishing my Against the Spread preview here in about an hour or two here on early Thursday afternoon. So I'll have all my thoughts on Arizona, Hawaii, and Florida, Miami. I just put up an SEC East preview yesterday. And then as the season goes, I'm going to have my Against the Spread preview out every day on Thursdays. And I'm fortunate enough that I hope that I'll be joining you, Adam, every Thursday. So it's going to be a fun season. I'll have a lot of content for you guys.
Well, once again, every Thursday, I guess we're going to call it here on Bang the Book Radio. Once again, Thor Nystrom at ThorKU on Twitter. Appreciate the time, man. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.